Hey, everybody. Welcome to On the Homefront. My name is John Murphy. Welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you here live on WILI, AM 1400 and 95.3 on the FM here every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. Or you might be watching us on YouTube. We always record the shows, so our guests get to meet you in many places on many devices. So we try to make our whole community more connected. We have another busy show this week in 3 parts. At the end of the show, I'm really happy to talk to author Joel Selvin again. We've had several interviews over the years about music and the music industry and music history. He has a book that's come out recently about Jim Gordon, one of the great rock drummers. A very tragic story about family relations, mental illness, but he's one of the greatest drummers in rock and roll, and he's on so many great records that you already know. He's the guy on the drums, and we'll talk about that bit of history at the end of the show. Coming up in a few minutes, we're going to talk to people in Franklin about the Music in the Park series. They're about to begin their 3rd season. They start in June, and they go through September, so we'll talk to them in a few minutes. But right now, I'm happy to have an update about the growing movement around the state for tenant unions. We have Katy Slininger on the phone right now. She is from the Cargill Mills Tenant Union in Putnam. She's the president. So, Katy, first of all, thanks for joining us again. It's always good to share some time to share your story.
Thanks for having me on.
Now, this has been going on. I've been covering this with you since last fall, but we were on the air about a month or so ago, and there's some things happening. Maybe we could start out with a good update on what's happening with the unit and the efforts to make things safer and healthier.
Yeah, so as we've spoken about before, we were dealing with, and still are dealing with, a lead exposure crisis. So we were all moved into this converted mill a few years ago, and it had been recently renovated,
right,
or so we thought, but then, there were high levels of lead everywhere. So we've been dealing with trying to get abatement done and, justice for the tenants who are living here. So within the last month, we've made incredible progress. I have a lot of good news to share with you.
I'm glad to share it. Good.
Yeah. So we had a group of about a dozen tenants that started a rent strike, a second rent strike this past January, which we were referring to as a wildcat rent strike,
right,
just because we were holding our rent outside of the housing court system. So we're still working through some eviction proceedings, including my own, because, we served a demand letter. We've been accepted as a tenant union by the management company and the landlord, but they weren't responding promptly. So we had a written demand letter, and it was signed by a supermajority of tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that smaller number of tenants actually provided the leverage through the rent strike by taking on that risk. Our landlord immediately retaliated and served us notices to quit and started that process. But myself, I have a young son, and then another family with young children are the only remaining tenants still on rent strike, and we're pushing to go all the way to court. But in the last few weeks, tenants here have started winning their cases through settlements. They've stopped at mediation, but it's in the tenant's favor, and they've all managed. The ones who chose to go to mediation have resolved it in their favor and have stayed. So that's extremely good on its own.
Yeah.
But beyond that, the rent strike itself provided enough public pressure, media attention, and then financial leverage to get the Attorney General involved. I think we had spoken when that had happened, if I'm remembering correctly.
We had talked about the Attorney General, and we also talked about the involvement of the EPA with the test results you got. Yeah.
Right. So the EPA issued a very monumental administrative order against our landlord, demanding that she complete the lead abatement within a very swift timescale, and also, she could still face further action by them on the actual neglect aspect,
sure,
and the lack of proper notice to tenants, things like that. But this administrative order that forces her to both compensate us for temporary relocation and protects us during that abatement process. The lawyers at UConn's law school who have been helping us with the housing and eviction clinic there they said they've never seen an EPA order regarding lead this large, at least, in their experience in Connecticut. So that was a major, major win, directly resulting from our organizing here. And then if you don't mind, can I tell you one more?
Oh,
win?
please.
Then,
I'm very happy to have good news. Please.
Yeah,
keep it going.
So the other thing is regarding our organizing relationship with AFS-CME Council 4, which it covers this region, a lot of school support staff, custodians, things like that. And we've built a relationship with them over the past year. Mm-hmm. Even one of their custodians, he was the former president of the Putnam Custodians Union, spoke at one of our rallies in defense of the Cargill Tenants Union and our work here. And in return, we've spoken on their behalf because the Putnam School District a few years ago had passed staffing off to a private contractor. And that company started underpaying and cutting pay of custodians. They fired this man, Dan McGinley, who is the former president of the Custodians Union. They got rid of him completely in the form of union busting. And so that was the issue that they have been advocating for at the Board of Ed meetings and at the town level that we showed support for. And then last week, the big news is the Putnam School District has canceled their contract and is going to rehire the union custodians directly, which is just a reversal of privatization. It's just a massive win for a small town, but it means a lot to them. So we're really excited.
That kind of symbolism has real power for other people who are struggling in other parts of the state. Do you have any idea what was it that turned the scales for them? Was it some sense of justice, or was there pressure on them to do the right thing from outside?
You know what? This is a relatively new win, and the AFS-CME organizers that I've been speaking with are in the process of writing up a press release about the whole process. Okay. So next time we check in, I would love to talk more about that because, I'm sure the organizing details of the last few weeks are very interesting.
Yes. The reason why we have Katy on today, by the way, if you just joined us, we're talking to Katy Slininger from Putnam at the Cargill Mills complex, is that across the state, tenant unions are forming because the system isn't working right now, and it needs fixing. And it's broken at so many levels, people are struggling just to figure out what the right steps are to do the right thing. So I don't want you to, blow us away with a whole movie of what you've gone through for a couple of years. But just, part of the trouble is when people go to their local government, it's supposed to help them. And sometimes governments cannot, and they say, well, there's no rule that says that yet, Oh, it makes sense, but it's not a rule. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how when you first started to try to go to the system to get some justice, that it just wasn't responding the right way, at least the way you described it to me?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an important aspect of this whole case. Right. So when we first found out about the high levels of lead in here, the first agency that's relevant to that situation is the Northeast District Department of Health, the NVDH. And so with lead poisoning, you're with kids under 6, that's kind of their legal mandate. And nationally, and according to EPA guidelines, health department inspections for lead are only triggered. There's only a mandate for the legal inspection if a child under 6 is exposed to the lead or shows signs of lead poisoning or has a high blood lead level. So that's a pretty narrow coverage for, responding as a Department of Health.
Right.
And it also requires the sacrifice of a child's health, because it's only in reaction to a poisoning. There's no mandate that before someone moves into an apartment, it has to be tested for lead.
Right.
And, just through our own ignorance at that point, we assumed a new renovation, they, of course, would have had to do lead tests or, completely remediate the place. So that was number one, and we're still kind of looking at the national need to update these guidelines where there's some sort of enforced preemptive, pre-move-in lead inspection in buildings older than 1978, as opposed to just in reaction to a child getting sick.
Right.
And that would make a big difference because once a child's sick, that lead is in their blood for a long, long time, and they can have damage for the rest of their life. So we take this very seriously, and that's policy-wise, that would be something to pursue in terms of solving that gap. But, from that point, we were demanding comprehensive lead inspections throughout the entire complex, largely because of the shocking level. It wasn't just, there's flaking lead paint on the wall. Like, of course, you chip it off and you paint over it. That's, a pretty easy procedure. And it also is pretty low risk. This was like thousands of micrograms of lead dust on the floor, on the windows, like possibly falling into people's mouths while they sleep because it's on the beams in their ceiling.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was not your normal lead hazard. It was, and continues to be until the whole place is abated, a major one. And like in the EPA's order, they describe it as an imminent danger to the tenants here. So,
wow.
We've had that acknowledgement. So we were saying, yes, there's no legal mandate for the NDDH to go through every single unit and test all of them. All they had to do was test the ones with kids under 6. And that's, they're only staffed for that level of intervention, funded. They need more, obviously, if this is going to be a bigger problem, as it clearly is. But anyway, so, then we go to the town. Like, this is a public health issue. This is also one of the largest apartment complexes in the town. So if it goes unresolved, you're looking at a mass displacement of residents.
Yeah. It's a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah. But for over a year, and even to this day, the town as a unit, so I'm talking like the director of economic and community development, the mayor, the board of selectmen, this is not my responsibility, and dead radio silence on the follow-up question, which would be, then whose is it? So
right.
We keep saying, because we've kind of escalated our rhetoric against the town administration because they've been actively hostile to us, trying to abdicate the social responsibility. And the more we push, the more the spotlight is on them to intervene in some way. And so they've started to get hostile over the past year and a half. But we've said to them, directly, all this would have taken is you saying, this is a big problem. I'm not sure what we should do, but let's figure it out. That's all it would have taken is or this is the person to contact. We were never given that option of external help or, the governmental help. Because we just had to research, what does each department do? What does each office do? Who can do this? And so there was a lot of crap shooting, can this person help with mold? And mold is another thing that we deal with here. And many people are surprised to know there's essentially no regulation related to mold. So, you could drop dead from black mold and it wouldn't technically have been illegal. So, there's a lot of these public health components of our case here that are clearly pointing to large-scale necessary changes in public health.
This is a good point to close, Katy, because you've kind of caught us up. And we'll have you back in June to figure out where things are, because I appreciate you sharing how the system needs to be addressed. It's not the kind of, the pollution issue you're struggling with. It's also the system that we have given ourselves to manage. And that just needs more care and attention so we can do better.
That's well said.
But it's been a long time, and I thank you for coming on periodically for an update. It's an example of many people around the state who are organizing themselves in their own unions because the system needs attention, and they just live every day, and it's very tiring to do that. So thanks again for being here, and we'll look forward to having you back in June.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Katy Slininger from the Cargill Mills Tenant Union. All right, we're going to take a break for a couple of short messages and come back and talk about a live music series coming back for its 3rd season in Franklin. Don't go away. Here on the Homefront, we're going to talk about live music in Franklin in a few minutes, but then after we're done talking to these good folks, we're going to talk about one of the great rock drummers of all time, Jim Gordon. He's played on so many historic records that you know and love. This is a great biography of his life and his struggles, and we'll talk of that with the author Joel Selvin for the last part of the show. Right now, I'm very happy to have these folks here from Franklin. It's Diane Lebich and her husband Dan, and they're opening their third season of Music in the Park right in Franklin. So congratulations on coming back for a third year.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So making it through the first two, you're back for more.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So, well, this is in Giddings Park, right in Franklin.
Yep.
So, give us a picture of your hopes for this season, next month.
Well, obviously we want to grow. We want to reach out to more people.
Oh, sure. That's why we're here.
That's right, right. Get it larger of a community event. We're not sure if we're reaching everybody, but it's a slow process. It takes time. And it really is to create a great event for not only for the community to experience music for free.
Right.
It's a great way to have the community get together. I know the last couple of shows we've had, kids are running around with everybody, which is great.
They call that family friendly.
Yes, it is.
Family
It absolutely
friendly.
is. Mm-hmm.
And it's also, for musicians to play in a beautiful venue amongst the woods, in a sense, in a great field, and 2 hours. And it's just a great experience for musicians that have not yet done that.
So the series is on Saturday nights, 6 to 8, starting in June to September on the second Saturday. So it's like third Thursdays, you remember that? Mm-hmm. Second Saturday, remember that, and you're all set to go. Mm-hmm. Now, is it one stage and people alternate sets? Is that what it is for the night?
So
one stage?
it's a 2-hour show.
Right.
So it's one stage. Mm-hmm. And they come out and they either can play a full 2 hours or it's usually just one band.
Okay.
That comes out and plays, and sometimes they'll take a break.
Of course.
15-minute break, 10-minute break, and then they come back and play the rest of the night till 8 o'clock.
Now, they're still building out their website because they're launching next month, but they have a Facebook page you can follow, Music in the Park. They're also on Instagram. And you said the season's pretty well booked. So
yes,
can you give us a preview of the kind of music you're going to have?
Yeah, so on June 8th, we have a great band called Secret Lita. And it's a 3-piece band that plays 80s, 90s, all the great hits that people, rock and roll that people love and know. Very talented musicians. They actually played for us a year before, maybe the first year.
I think they played the first year.
But you always want to please the audience, and when the audience wants them back, you bring them back. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did. The great band. That's June 8th. And July 13th, we have the 60s Explosion show. And that's pretty much self-explanatory. It's a pretty big band, actually.
Yeah, I think they have quite the following, which is why we're super excited to have them this year. We have not had them yet, and we're hoping that they bring a...
it's one thing I've noticed around the state. There is a network of venues, and people will play. It's only a few hours to get there, and they are kind of making a new network.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, we've been able to bring a lot of local talent. From the very first year, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. From the very first season, we had... I think every single artist was from Franklin.
Yeah.
Every single one. So when we first put the word out and people were responding that they were interested in playing for us, they all happened to be from Franklin, so everybody's been local.
Yeah.
Bunch of townies.
Yeah. Talented townies.
Talented townies. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so now we're reaching out. So on August 10th, we have Red Number 5. Now, this is a very, I think, interesting group. It's a group of 4 ladies that they do a cappella.
Fantastic. I love vocals.
And that's another point of this is we're trying to get a wide variety of music.
Yep.
So it's not the same thing every month. I mean, it's 4 times a year, but and they're the most amazing voices individually, but when you combine them together, it's amazing. And they play all different styles of music, from big band, jazz to your Cyndi Lauper, maybe just things of the in the present time. Fabulous band. So that's August 10th, and then September 14th, we have a gentleman by the name of Dr. K's Uke. He plays the ukulele. He is all over the place. I don't know if you've heard of him yet, but he's everywhere. And he's fabulous, and he...
Ukuleles come and go, but recently they're hot again.
Yeah, they're hot again.
Steve Martin,
banjo, ukulele.
Yeah.
So can I just say that he's actually... This is... his name is Kevin Sally, who is Dr. K's Uke, and he's actually sharing stage time, so that we're going to have Kevin be half, And Dan Lebich be the other
come
half.
up and play the next half.
For the first time, he's going to perform this time. He has not done this yet.
You do solo, or do you have a duet?
I do solo. Once, I thought I was done, but they pull me back in right now. So yeah, I do solo, and Kevin plays. I would think he might smack me, but I think it's pretty much called yacht rock.
Uh-oh.
But Kevin, I'm so sorry, Kevin. If it's wrong, buddy, I'm sorry. But it's great. It's
going to have to bring a very large lounge chair.
Yes. He's got a fabulous voice. Mm-hmm. And he does this thing where he has his bass pedals on the floor. He plays with his feet. Okay. So there's a bass tone going along with his ukulele. Yeah. Plus he has, which I've noticed a lot of the youngsters now are doing, is the looping.
Yep.
When they're single musicians, they want to fill up the sound more, so they loop it.
And they play the loops.
Yes, and he does that, so it's a really good sound. And then little old Meek will come up and play a couple covers, but mostly original.
All right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is it. This is the story, Mm-hmm. So we're going to air this a couple of times over the summer. It starts in June. It's always the second Saturday, 6 to 8 p.m. Now, I hate to bring it up, but if the weather turns on you, do you move it? Is it just, that's it?
I really hope you didn't just jinx us, because we've had 2 successful seasons with no rain. So this season, we're hoping no rain, but we actually have to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
We're going to have to work on that. So when we
start next month.
Yeah, and when we come to you and talk with you about this stuff, this is all, I should also say, 100% volunteer, 100%. We're learning as we go. So we're always looking for volunteers, people who want to help out, suggestions. We're looking for always band recommendations. Donations, of course, is always gigantic, because this is what we do, is we raise the money to pay the musicians. And currently we're going to be planning to build a new stage, a permanent stage for the town of Franklin to enjoy for all the different.
It's kind of like Shabu Stage.
Exactly. Well, it's not going to be that big.
Same idea.
Same idea. Yeah, a stage for the town of Franklin to have, and have anyone and everyone use
all the arts for
whatever they want. And so there could be theater groups, there could be more music, there could be all sorts of talent taking the stage, and we'd like to be a part of making that happen.
And if I could just throw out real quick, if there's any bands that are listening, if you guys know any bands, they can contact us through Facebook, through Instagram. We're always looking for new bands.
They can also reach out to the Franklin Rec Department.
Yes, we are currently actually partnered with the Franklin Rec Commission. Okay. And they're a big help, and we thank them very much.
Sure. Well, this helps them do their job in a really good way.
Yeah.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, yeah. So, again, Facebook is Music in the Park. Enjoy outside. Get out. Enjoy live music wherever you can. If you want to volunteer, this is a great story of volunteers without a lot of money making it work anyway.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to see, and I really thank you for doing that.
Thank you for letting us speak with you and your audience.
You betcha. We'll have you back in the summertime, and we'll keep it going all the way through September.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. That'd be great. Yes.
Thank you guys very, very much.
Thank you.
All right. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to have a great conversation with Joel Selvin. And to set the stage, we're going to hear a tune where the subject of our conversation is on the drums. It's a tune you probably know from the Monkees in their early days. And we'll give a little taste of that drum, and then we'll come back. Stay with us. Don't go away. Okay, that was Mary Mary from the Monkees in their early days. Now, the drummer on that set was Jim Gordon, one of the great all-time drummers in rock and roll. I've been playing records on the radio since 1968. He's been on many, many of those records. They're in your brain somehow deep down, but you might not know who was on the drum set. That's part of the story today that we're going to have with Joel Selvin. Just recently, he's published a fantastic new book that I really enjoyed. It's called Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. And Joel Selvin is a best-selling author and an award-winning journalist covering our culture and music and cultural history. He's got 15 books out, and they're wonderful reads. This one here is like a locomotive. There's 2 tracks to this story. One is the incredible musical history of Jim Gordon, and the other one is his tortured spirit that led to real family tragedy. And Jim is someone that really touches us today because so many people are concerned about mental health and stress and what happens to families. This is a good example of how someone can be a genius in every way, but one part of his life takes him down. And it's a great dichotomy. Joel tells this story with real empathy. He avoids the Hollywood stuff, although he talks about hard things. He's not pandering. He's really lifting Jim up to restore his position. So, Joel, thank you for joining us on the phone. I appreciate having some time with you once again today.
John, thank you. I really feel like you got the book. I mean, that's what I was trying to do, was restore Jim to the conversation, because, you know, after the crime, everybody just looked away and never thought about him again.
That's right. And I should mention to the audience, too, I've had a chance to talk to Joel 2 times before. His wonderful book about Sylvester Stewart, Sly and the Family Stone, an oral history, another tragedy of another genius who was struggling with his own spirit and drugs, and also a great one about culture in California, Hollywood Eden, electric guitars, fast cars, and the myth of California paradise. It's like a Raymond Chandler noir mystery of culture and rock and roll and studio life and all the vipers that are out there, the whole cultural scene. Joel, you're really quite a travelogue here of our culture, and I really commend you for bringing this to keep it alive so people see this rich history way beyond just the songs.
You're very kind, John.
So the question is now, could we talk a little bit about some of the recording highlights, because we have a few minutes to chat, and there's so many stories here that there's a couple of them that really stood out. I talked about the Monkees thing before with Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart and the Candy Store Prophets thing. But Brian Wilson really loved Jim Gordon, and they worked together on some incredible records. So maybe you could share a couple of stories about some of the great places where Jim worked and the impact of his incredible technique.
Well, Jim came to the attention of the Hollywood recording scene through his work with the Everly Brothers. And the Kingpin studio drummer, Hal Blaine, kind of took Jim under his wing. He was like 20 years old, 21 maybe, and brought him into the Beach Boys session, which were at the absolute pinnacle of what was going on in West Coast rock at that time. Right in the middle of the Pet Sound session. And Jim plays extra percussion on some stuff while Hal's on the drums, and he takes the drum kit for a couple of tracks. But it was God only knows that where the sort of crazy genius of Brian Wilson and Jim Gordon converged. And it's interesting, isn't it, John? Both of them are schizophrenics, right?
Birds of a feather.
But, Jim was fooling around with plastic orange juice bottles on a break. And Brian liked what he was doing, so they took a razor blade and they cut the bottoms off 4 orange juice bottles and pitched them to different notes. So with Hal behind the kit, Jim followed the rhythm with the orange juice bottles. Clip, clop, clip, clop, clip, clop, 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 clip, clop, clip, clop, clip, clop. And Brian loved it. He featured it in the mix. And you'll never hear God Only Knows the same way again. It's Jim Gordon on orange juice bottles.
Well, one of the things that you really point out in a very affectionate way is while Jim is struggling with a lot of his personal relationships, especially those with women and his family life, is he comes up with these genius moments in the studio that just transcend everything. And he's recognized for that. So maybe you could talk a little bit. People just hear the song, but they don't know about a fill or when do you not hit a note, how he plans to use space and how he's so flexible in every kind of a song. He seems to have an intuition. And that really struck people, his native intuition.
There's so much to say about this, but let me say 2 things. One, Jim had this kind of supernatural ability on drums. He could divide and reallocate time so precisely, and he saw the drums as a wholly musical instrument and fit it into the fabric of the composition that he was playing on. He wasn't just somebody hitting the backbeat and keeping time.
Right.
He was adding to the whole thing. And people who saw this ability were astonished. He just played a different game than everybody else. And I am convinced that this incredible skill is rooted in the same biochemical system that created his horrible mental illness. And by the same time, the second thing that I want to say is that when Jim played drums, when he was striking the drum set, and you feel that in every cell in your body.
Right.
And then there's the rhythmic entrainment, the hypnotic effect of the mighty groove. So when he was playing drums, he shut out the illness, and he was whole, he was well, he was in charge of the world, he was in command, he was confident, and life was fine. And then he would stop playing the drums, and everything would come back.
Right. It was a bad feedback loop, but financially successful. He was very much in demand, so he had the life, but in his private moments, it was a real hell. And it ended up, of course, he had to kill his mom, the whole thing, the voices in his head. And you spare the horror, but you show the truth. So you're not doing a Hollywood pandering about it, but you are showing how deeply it cut into his life and his relationships with women. I know there's a woman, I believe her name was Stacy, and I believe she was the first woman that he admitted that he was hearing voices in his head. And then he was kind of rough with her, and they broke up, but he kept this to himself totally, right?
He saw dozens of psychiatrists before he admitted to one that he was hearing these voices, and that guy put him immediately in residential treatment. He stayed for 2 months, no improvement, checked out against medical advice, went home, and attempted suicide. They brought him back to the hospital. He looked at the psychiatrist, and he said, "The voices don't care whether I live or die." And he was in, like, 15 mental hospitals over the course of 5 years. Like every couple months, he'd check into a mental hospital.
Right.
He was in drug recovery and alcohol recovery programs. He tried so hard to battle this horrible, debilitating disease, and at the same time, he had to keep it masked and hidden from public view so that he could continue to participate in this professional career.
Yeah.
That was an incredible hellscape that he lived in.
By the way, I just want to mention, in case you've joined us, we're on the phone right now with Joel Selvin, who's recently put out a fantastic book, Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. It's from the Diversion Press. And I just want to make one quick sidebar to Sly, because in the book that we talked about last time, you go through the same stress, although Sly's mental troubles were far more public in terms of many ways, but it was the same issue of drugs and a genius that was affected, and it later cost him his career. Could you draw any connection with Sly and how that's part of the beast of the music industry that we're still struggling with today?
Well, I feel far less sympathetic with Sly. He brought all his problems on himself. He treated people around him terribly.
Yeah.
He consumed the world for his own narcissistic satisfaction. Jim was an entirely different character. Jim was someone who struggled to maintain his position in where he was and had to mask his illness. And he didn't really, have that kind of evil undertone. He was just trying to maintain and cope. And I don't think Sly was mentally ill. I think Sly was just drug addicted. And Jim was both.
Yeah.
Those guys in Derek and the Dominoes, they took so much drugs and drank so much booze, they didn't know where they were when they were there.
Yeah. Well, I want to mention, too, another musical hero of mine, Frank Zappa, is somebody who's known for being very demanding of his musicians, of their technique and their competence, and he really was impressed with Jim Gordon and some of his work. He called him Skippy, apparently, because of his kind of Beach Boys appearance, but he was in the band that toured with the Grand Wazoo. I love that record, and Apostrophe. But could you talk a bit about Frank and how they got along and how they worked briefly?
Jim got that job on an audition doing cold read.
Wow.
And Zappa's sheet music is really dense and intricate.
Oh, yeah.
But Jim could read anything. They call it, musicians call it fly dung. He was a brilliant reader and an equally brilliant improviser, and that's just right up Zappa's alley because his music was partly scored, partly improvised. And that's him on Apostrophe. That's like a 5-minute track that's the title cut to Zappa's best-selling album, and it's Jim, Jack Bruce from Cream, Tony Duran, who was the other guitar player in Zappa's band, and Zappa. And it's boiled down from an 8-hour jam session during the tour at Electric Ladyland in New York.
Well, only Frank could edit that thing. Wow, 8 hours, huh?
I would like to hear the other 7.5 hours, you know? God, those guys could play.
Now, there's a funny story in the book about a great tune that was a huge radio hit, and back in the day when radio had instrumental hits, they're kind of extinct now, but in my generation there's a whole wave of records that were fantastic melodies, well produced, and people loved them. Classical Gas was that thing with Mason Williams and Jim's on the drums, but Tommy Smothers hated it the first time he heard it, and that was the Smothers Brother guy. Can you talk about Classical Gas and what it was such a hit, but it was a real surprise in terms of the studio aspect?
Well, Mason Williams was a writer on the Smothers Brothers show, and he was a guitar player.
Right.
And he had this cute little guitar tune, and they said record it, and they assigned the recording to Mike Post. And this is the guy that does all the TV themes, but very early in his career. Brilliant guy. Of course, he and Jim started out together in a band called Frankie Knight and the Jesters when they were both at Grant High School in Van Nuys.
Jeez.
And Post, for a long time, never went in the studio without Jim. Did the Andy Williams show with Jim, did all these records. But I think there's a 28-piece session call. It's a gigantic session. It's no longer a tiny little guitar figure, and it's not really a Mason Williams record anymore. It's a Mike Post record. And in the middle of all this cacophonous giant sound is one drummer just slamming it, and that's Jim. He's really the MVP on the session. Ties everything together like the rug and the Big Lebowski.
And Jim Gordon, if he was around, he would abide. I think he would abide. I had to do it. You gave me the line. I had to do it. Joel Selvin, I want to thank you for coming by today. I really commend you on the book. I'd love to talk to you again about some of your other books because I think there's 15, and each one is a trip of its own. So maybe we can continue our conversations. I really enjoyed
John, it's always a pleasure. I really appreciate the support. I love talking about Jim.
Yeah.
I think he's just really an important forgotten figure, and we're trying to restore his reputation and create some empathy and sympathy for this guy because he didn't really get much while he was alive.
Right. So I'm very happy to add a little effort in that spirit, and I thank you again, Joel, for all your good work. I wish you a great summer ahead, Joel. Thank you again.
Thanks, John. We'll talk again.
Take care. Alrighty, our time flies here on the Homefront, as you know. If you want to get involved, the studio is open. John at Human Arts Media is the email. Don't be shy. I'm going to see you next week.